All right, we are going to be creating this animation today. We are going to be using geometry nodes to get everything to align. We're actually going to be utilizing proximity in order to get the cylinders to meet the sphere where he's rolling. So it's really fun. Lining things up in geometry nodes can be tough, but we're going to knock it out in this animation. So let's get into it. If motion design is what you are into and you want to learn more about motion design, you can check out my Patreon. I have a ton of tutorials that I've posted this year, all focused on making motion graphics, a lot of geometry nodes, a lot of technique, lighting, movement, all of this stuff. You can find that on my Patreon. You can also get 10% off if you subscribe annually. So feel free to check out my Patreon if you want to learn more of this stuff. All right, so we are going to start in a blank document. Also, speaking of Patreon, you can get the project file on Patreon right now as well. So we're going to start out with a just piece of geometry just to get the thing going, and I'm going to hop into the geometry nodes workspace. This is what mine looks like. Yours might look a little bit different, but still the same workspace. I'm going to click new, and let's first get an object to hold our object. So we're going to get a mesh circle and give it 8 on the vertices. And I'm going to plug it right into the geometry nodes output. Now, one thing we need to do before we actually put some cylinders on here is create some cylinders here in the viewport so that we can bevel it. So let's get a cylinder. I'm going to give myself 120 on the vertices. That's probably too many, but it's better safe than sorry in my opinion. And this is not a very heavy scene. And then I'm going to give myself really, really tall in the depth. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit tab, go to the move tool and just bring it down a little bit so our anchor point is pretty much more toward the top. And then what we can do is go here to the modifiers and get in a bevel modifier and bevel it however much you want and just edit your amount and we're good to go. So let's move him out of the way just as far as you want. We can click back on our mesh circle and get a search instance on points node and just go ahead and grab the cylinder straight from your outliner and plug the geometry into the instance. So we're going to have something like this. So what we can do is on the scale, just click and drag. On the scale, just click and drag and just bring them until they just kind of barely touch. We don't want them actually touching, but we want them as close to each other as possible. I do actually want to bring my radius up a little bit. This is really just for lighting so that we can have a little bit more reasonable power when it comes to our lighting. And then we can just bring these up a little bit. Sometimes having microscopic objects like this would have been does make it a little bit more frustrating with lighting. So get more reasonable sizes. This is going to help you in the long run. So we now have this. Let's go ahead, and the way we are going to get these objects to sort of meet the sphere where he's at is by using proximity. And so let's go ahead and create a system to get the proximity to work. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and get is an empty, if I could find it. There we go, empty plane axis. And these, we're definitely going to want to label them. It's going to get a little complicated. So we'll do empty, and I'm going to title him underscore proximity. So empty on the proximity, and then I'm going to go ahead and get a curve circle. And again, we'll label him as well. Proximity. And then I'm going to click on this empty, go here to the constraints, and I'm going to add a follow path. And we're just going to select that path. And then here on the path, let's just scale him to be at the middle of our objects. And then now we have this empty right here. Let's go ahead and animate him to go in a circle. So I'm going to keep it at the default 250 frames, but make sure you hit the back arrow to frame 0. And then in your preferences, in the animation tab, be sure that your interpolation is on linear. So we're going to click on a keyframe here on the offset, go to the very end and type in 100. On this particular constraint, 100 is just going to give you a 360-degree rotation. And if we press play, you can see he goes around just like that. So that's what we want. And we're going to use that to trigger our proximity animation. So back in geometry nodes, we're going to hit Shift A and get in a set position. The proximity is going to be triggering the position of our objects. And so if we bring him down a little bit, we only want to trigger the position of the Z. So in order to isolate that in geometry nodes, we're going to get a combine XYZ so that we can actually have access to the Z socket. bring it here, and then let's go back to our outliner and grab the empty proximity, and we'll get him going. So he's going to be the thing that Geometry Nodes is going to recognize the position of. And so we need to get a mesh line. And the reason why we want to get a mesh line is we can bring this count down to 1. So we're just creating one little point so that in Geometry Nodes we have some geometry that it can recognize, that if we plug location to start location, essentially parents it. So this empty will be sort of bringing our little Geometry Nodes point around, and Geometry Nodes can recognize it. So we have that. We're going to get a geometry proximity node, and we're going to switch that over to points and plug mesh into geometry. And then if we just plug distance straight into the Z, you can see, okay, cool, it works. If I press play, you can see something happening. So that is what we want. What we can do now is I can just bring these guys over. We're never going to touch them again. We don't need to edit anything. So what we need now is a map range to get a few things going. So right now I'm noticing when the empty is by the objects, it brings them down. I want the opposite effect. I want them to go up. And so the way you invert a map range is the 2 min, 2 max. 2 max go to 0, and then 2 minimum go to 1. So that now does this. Now there's two things I want. One, I want them to sort of have some context. So I don't want it just one going up at once. I want a few kind of interacting up at once. So what I can do here is on the from max, bring a few more. So if I'm just playing around with this, if you play with that max, you can see how it affects them all. I want maybe like 3 of them sort of being affected at one time. See that? So now it's a little bit more than just one. But another thing I want to do is see how it's flat. Imagine the sphere is going to be there. I want one more. I want more to be high up. And so your from minimum is going to be able to sort of fix that. Okay, so now we have this. I can just kind of maybe bring it down a little bit. So let's just sort of play with these. Get a few to just sort of interact. There we go. So it's going to allow a few to be flat as the sphere goes around. So edit with these from min, from max to get the behavior the way you want. Now, last week I uploaded a video specifically talking about the motion of how these work. See how they go up and they immediately stop. And it's sort of a linear motion from bottom to top, and it has a stop, right? And if you've have some experience in animation, you'll understand what I mean when I say sort of playing with the graph editor or changing the velocity. So instead of it just like moving like this, instead of the object just kind of like moving like this, it'll maybe go like very like quick and slow. So what I want is it to kind of quickly move and then slowly stop. How do you change that when we're working with stuff like this? We're not actually animating start at the bottom, go to the top in a basic way like that. So we have to figure out how to do it here in Geometry Nodes. And the way you do that is either with the math node set to power, but we're not going to use that. We're going to use a RGB curves. And this is actually convenient because this curve actually shows the type of curve that we would make in a graph editor. So if you take this and you bring this one here, and don't worry about it changing that, and you take this one here, you'll notice a bigger change in the motion. So if I hit M, see how that behaves? Let's just kind of look at them for a second, see that? And if I bring my curves on, it very slowly brings it into, sort of smoothly brings it in. And so what you can do is just to slightly sort of tweak this until you like the effect. And so basically, the more straight up and down this portion is, the quicker those cylinders are going to pop up. So if you bring it more like this, it's going to be much smoother, which this is pretty satisfying right here. So if you want to copy my curve, sort of seeing how that looks, you certainly can. Yeah, this is pretty satisfying and smooth. So if you want to copy that curve, you totally can, but just to check, this is how it looks just without any editing. They just kind of slam to the top. And then if I bring it back, I'll turn this on. it's much smoother. And then, of course, if you want to edit the height of anything and everything, you can sort of take these guys, leave them alone. We can enjoy the settings that we created for them. Just move them out of the way, and we can get a new map range to simply edit the height of things to bring them how you want, and it's not going to change sort of our new interpolation animation that we created. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and get a sphere to be living on top of this whole thing. So we can go ahead and do that. I'm trying to center out my world here. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to get a icosphere, and then we can just give him more subdivision, smooth him out. And what I want to do is put him on a new curve. So if I get a new Bezier circle, and I'm going to call him underscore ball, I'll take him and we're going to add a constraint, object constraint, follow path, and we'll use the ball path. So that now I'm going to hit the tilde key. So I'm going to move my object out of the way. I'm going to click on the ball path and bring it up because he is controlling the sphere. I do want him to be a little smaller first. So something like that. And then we can go back and do that. And then we can just hit S and bring him to the very center. Okay, so now he's here. I think he's still kind of eating into the bottom, so we can bring it up a little bit more. Perfect. And then let's go ahead and animate him. So if we click on the sphere, we go back to our constraints here. We'll start at frame 0, click keyframe, and just type in 100. Perfect. He's doing that. Now, once we add our materials, then we can actually edit him to be looking like he's rotating. And then I'm going to make sure you click on follow curve so that when we do the rotation, it will be correct. Let's go ahead now and set up our camera to create sort of that like tracking animation that I added. And so I'm going to hit the tilde key, click on the very front. That's very important so that when we import our camera, he's looking straight. And so we'll go ahead and click on camera, and then we'll just bring him back. And let's add a new empty for the camera to sort of focus on so he's looking at the right thing. So we'll get a new empty, and we'll call him empty underscore track. And then we'll go to our camera view. Let's go ahead and bring our camera up. In the camera settings, we'll switch him to orthographic, and then back into the camera, we'll go here and add a track to constraint and grab that empty track. And so now what's going to happen is when I click on my empty here, we're going to go here to the constraints. We're going to go ahead and add him to a follow path, and I guess we'll choose ball. All right, cool. And make sure you click on follow curve. So now this empty, when we move him around, the camera is going to be looking at him. And so let's go ahead and animate this new empty that we created. So if we click offset, go to the very end, type in 100, hit I, our camera will be following him. So what we can do now is click on the camera and start to move the camera to where we want. So maybe we'll edit him on the Z. And then here on our empty track, I'm going to go back to frame 0 just so that we can move him correctly. We'll bring it more to the center. And again, if it's not moving the way you want it, which is sort of right here in the middle and angling properly, make sure you click on follow curve. And so now we can just sort of monitor that. And then we can bring this down. And then possibly bring our camera, and then the orthographic scale. So camera track, play with our orthographic scale, back to empty track. All right, great. Now, as my dad would say, now we're cooking with peanut oil. All right, so we have this. It's all ready. Maybe bring it up a little bit. Now we can do materials and lighting and finish this off. So we can head into the shading tab first, though. Click on the cylinders. Go back to geometry nodes. In order to add materials, we do need to get a set material node. We'll click on the icosphere, give him a material, click on the cylinders, give them a material, and grab that material we added to the cylinders here in geometry node. So now we can go and focus on the shading. So let's do some cool stuff. Here on the icosphere, let's go and give it a color ramp. We'll plug it in. Let's get a noise texture. And then if you have the node wrangler add-on enabled, I'm going to hit Control T, get a mapping node, get a texture coordinate node, and add the object coordinate and plug him here. So I'm going to bring my detail to 0. We're going to bring our scale down so we get a little bit of a pattern. And then I'm going to go to ease on my color ramp and then just sort of bring these in until we get a really interesting looking pattern. And then I'm going to give this kind of a neon green. There we go. So we can do that. And then right here, we can give him a bit of a gray that is in the ballpark of the neon green as well. There we go. So now we have this. Of course, he's not rolling. He doesn't look like he's rolling. So we'll fix that in a little bit. Let's just focus on shading. Here on the cylinders, we're going to kind of create two different materials. So one, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control C and copy that color ramp and Control V to bring it there. Plug this here, and let's get a gradient texture. Hit Control T, use that object coordinate and plug color here. So we can go ahead on the Y and give it -90 degrees. Actually, no, just regular 90. And if you want, the gradient's actually fine. I like it how it is. But if you want to change it, you can go here to B-spline on the color ramp. And then just sort of do something like that. And then on the Z, you can actually stretch out the gradient to be bigger if you want. I like it. I really like it like this, so we're going to leave it. So this is kind of the first material that we made. What I want to do now is I'm going to hover over here. I'm going to hit Control C. And then we're going to get a RGB node. And then hover over here, Control V. Let's mix these two together with a mix color node. So now we're going to have two different materials, but I want to randomly distribute just the solid color and then the one we did with the gradient. So we're going to get a noise texture. We're going to get a color ramp to be able to control this effect that we're going to create. And we need to get a object info node. And what he's going to do is understand that there's multiple individual objects here and going to distribute some randomness to them. So we can use the random socket and then just plug all of these guys together. I'm going to switch him to constant and then bring it in the middle and then plug that into the factor. And so now this whole system is going to differentiate this guy from this string of nodes. And so when we play around with our color ramp, it's going to randomly distribute stuff. And then you can play like with your detail and your scale to sort of get kind of a random seed and then just distribute around our randomness. Last thing I want to do here is switch over to the cycles render engine. I'm going to go here and hit the drop down. You can get some preview lights so I can look at what I'm doing. We'll go back to the principled, and I want to just give this guy a subsurface material. So click and drag, make it 1, bring your weight up, and then bring your scale up, and it's going to make these nice and subsurface. It's really cool. And then let's go ahead and get a, right up here, we're going to get our background now. So Shift A, plane, we're going to hit RX 90, scale it up, and then we're going to bring it back. Right about here, I guess. And then it needs to come down. And then let's just make sure our plane is in the view. Great. So what we do now is just get a new material. We're going to get a color ramp, a noise texture. We can plug these together. Again, I'm going to hit Control T, vector, and then we can bring these in a little bit with a B spline to make them really smooth. Bring your detail down, bring your scale up, something like this. Sometimes you don't really need to overthink your backgrounds. Just make it look really misty and ambient. All right, we'll go back to layout. Let's get our ball to look like he rolls. And so the way we can do that, I'll just go to Material Preview. Here in the transform settings of the sphere, we need to rotate him on the X. Now, because I've already done this, I already know I'm gonna hit keyframe on the rotation, go here, and I'm gonna type in 1080, which is 3 rotations. So 1080, I, and now he is gonna rotate around properly. And again, if it looks like it's weird, if the rotation is strange, it may be because you haven't clicked on follow curve in your constraint. That's going to be kind of your deal breaker. All right, last we just need to go ahead and light this. So go to your cycles preview. I'm just going to get a good angle, something like this. Shift A, get a area light. I'm going to hit G and move him over. Something like this. I'm going to hit R twice. And then on this, I'm going to bring him up a little bit. I want the light to also hit our background. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get this light to be up a little bit and farther back. I'm just using G and R, clicking R twice to move things around. In the camera settings, we're going to go here to a disk and give your power to like 500. And then what I always like to do is bring my spread down to something like this, and then we can bring our brightness up a little bit. Let's just go ahead. I'm going to scale it up a little bit. I'm going to hit Shift D, get a new one, bring it somewhere over here. So we can get some lighting like this. And then the last thing we can do, get another area light and just get a top light just to fill out the rest of the scene. Sweet, we're done. We are all done with this animation. So let me show you my render settings and we'll be done. I do notice this light is really bright, so maybe we can bring it down to something like this. All right, cool. So now that we're all done, we can just go ahead and render it. I'm gonna keep it at 1920 by 1080, and I think as long as you turn on your denoising, 200 samples should be fine. You'll have a really nice render from that. And then you can just go ahead and pick, I would recommend using a PNG sequence, pick your file, render animation, and when you're done, you'll have something really cool like mine. So there you guys go. Hope you learned something from this. This is a really, really fun, what would we call it, like a kinetic style animation. Again, if you want to grab the project file, that's on Patreon, along with so much more Geometry Nodes motion design training. So if you want to check that out, you can get it 10% off if you subscribe annually. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.